This meeting is good afternoon, everyone. This meeting is being called to order at 1:03 p.m. Day, February 10th, 2025. Review and approval of our January 27th meeting, special meeting minutes. Everyone had a chance to review them. Is there any discussion prior to approval of the minutes? Okay, seeing no discussion, we will approve the minutes as currently listed. I don't think I have to take a vote for that. There's no discussion, correct? We did last time. All right, announcements. We have an update on the education chair meeting. I had met with Representative Leeper last week and discussed where we are in terms of the number of meetings that we've had, the amount of building background and understanding that was done so far, the past three and a half meetings, we'll call it, with a special meeting. And she understood, and we discussed any, whether or not they had any recommendations related to certification or preparation, and she said no, not at this time. So she understands that we will be moving forward and in the next session, possibly providing legislation at that time based off of the timeline that was provided by Laura Stefan at our last meeting, and our understanding of submitting to the State Department of Legal Ed and things that go with that. Okay. The next part was an update on both hiring as well as the package to the state. And actually, we have to do roll call. I'm sorry, Chloe. Could you do roll call, Chloe, and then go into that part?
Get the list up. Sure. Jennifer Rodriguez. Here. Cynthia Ritchie. Here. Christian Basega. Here. Elsa Batista. Here. Tiffany Collette. Can everyone virtually hear me? Here. Okay. See. Tiffany, I see you there. Can you just unmute? Tell us if you're here. Okay, I'll come back to you. Jennifer said she's leaving and coming back. And Deshelle.
Here.
You, Sarah Larford Simons.
Good afternoon. Here.
Dr. Rebecca Good. Here. Jenny Graves. Margaret Gustafson. Shannon Merriman, not here. Therese McCarthy.
Here.
Dr. Catherine Rowe.
Here.
That's our Taurus. She's here. Cynthia Sotomayor, she's here, but we'll be back. Thank you.
Perfect. And then Chloe.
Oh, hi, Jennifer.
This is Jennifer. I just wanted to let you know that I'm here. Thank you. Delaney.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right there.
Okay. So for the administrator hiring process, last week, a few members of the CSTE team had 5 interviews. Well, so we're trying to coordinate with a finalist with the commissioner for either late this week or next week, being that there's a holiday twice this week and next week. So updates to come. You all obviously will have updates as soon as I have them. Yeah, and then in terms of like a transition, once someone is hired, I will be supporting until they get their feet on the ground, and then
And then the packet that was asked about for the understanding is that you have to receive receipt.
yeah. So I sent the report for our first report that was sent to the legislature and the State Board of Ed. I'm just awaiting confirmation. So once I have that, I'll forward you that email. That's easier than sending.
And you'll be posting that to the web.
Yeah, that will be posted, yeah.
So we're just waiting for that receipt and that can be posted publicly for everybody to access at that point.
Who has a question?
Could I ask that the members of the board receive copies when communications are sent to the legislature rather than waiting for it to be posted or received? It becomes a public document once we have released it.
I think that we're just waiting for confirmation that they've received that.
I care more about seeing what was sent to them than knowing that they received it.
Yeah, I can include, it's just, I don't transmit it physically, so yeah, I can ask her to include you all. Thanks.
All right. Couple for accreditation, education preparation presentation, Kate. I believe they're online and they will be presenting to us.
Great. And can you all hear me okay?
Sure. And right before you get started, just as a reminder, Dr. Rajiv, if you're able to kind of keep an eye on anybody raising their hand online. And we start off with any questions first at a time when it's appropriate for the presenter has finished their presentation to ask additional questions at that time. All right, go ahead. Thank you.
I'll share my
Thanks.
screen.
And while the screen is being shared, the first slide is just introduction. So we'll start with those. My name is Chris Cook. I am the president of CAPE. I have been with CAPE since 2015. Prior to that, I served as the Illinois State Superintendent of Education. I'll let my team introduce themselves as they're listed there. Melina, you want to go next?
I'm Melina Monaco. I'm the Senior Vice President for Accreditation.
Tim Finkley, Vice President of Membership Engagement and Board Services. Nice to meet everyone.
Hello, I'm Matt Fanover, Vice President for Communications and Government Affairs.
I also just wanted to share a little bit about the composition of CAPE's board. So Chloe, if you could go to the next slide. Our board is a diverse group of individuals made up of higher ed representatives, including deans, faculties, provosts or presidents. We have both national teachers unions represented on our board, as well as teachers themselves, specialized professional associations, local district administrators who hire teachers, and then members of the public. The diversity of the board help in ensuring that as we look at things like standards for the profession and policies guiding those, that we have a lot of diverse viewpoints to inform that thinking. Even prior to coming to CAPE, I served on the CAPE board as a state commissioner. Next slide, please. Also wanted to talk a little bit about what CAPE does. One of the things we were asked to differentiate is what CAPE does and what we don't do. We develop standards for the profession. Our standards cover a number of areas, including content pedagogy, clinical experience, recruitment, the impact of preparation, continuous improvement, and resources. The impact of preparation includes the perception of candidates who complete programs, as well as the impact on K-12 learning and how employers see the preparation that's done. We also maintain and develop elementary K-6 standards. We did that once the Specialized Professional Association for Elementary Standards ceased to do so. So we picked up that role and we maintain those. We make those available for free to our members and to states. We, of course, evaluate programs against our standards. That is the process of accreditation. And we accredit providers who fall within our scope. The scope of accreditation are programs that lead to licensure, certification, or endorsements, both within the U.S. and internationally. Next slide, please. We also we do our work as an accreditor through a large volunteer pool. We have around 700 volunteers, and we train and evaluate volunteers to conduct our accreditation reviews. Our accreditation council, who makes up accreditation decision, is also made up of volunteers. who spend time to ensure that the standards are adhered to. We partner with states. We currently have 35 partnership agreements with states, including with yours. And we partner with specialized professional associations. Professional associations are associations who generate content standards for various disciplines. And the reason we partner with them is so it's easier for our membership as well as the specialized professional associations themselves. They use our accreditation information management data system to help inform their and regulate, rather keep track of their volunteers. And also it helps in having the results of those reviews available when they come up for CAPE accreditation. An important role of CAPE is also that we support our membership and we assist them with best practice resources and training. So we try to take what we learned from accreditation reviews and from changes that are occurring throughout the United States and ensure that our membership have the latest and best information regarding that. Next slide, please. Some things that CAPE does not do. We don't license individuals. That is, of course, a state role. We don't develop standards for all licensure areas, so we don't maintain content standards for the various disciplines. We also don't accredit professional development. Professional development does not fall within our scope, and so that's not something that we do. We also do not accredit providers who don't meet standards. CAPE is a consequential accreditor. So that means that we sometimes place providers on probation if they're having difficulty in meeting our standards. We have also revoked or denied applicants and those who seek accreditation if in fact they don't meet the standards. Next slide, please. Our membership is made up currently of about 559 accredited providers. 15% of those are minority serving institutions. I mentioned earlier, we have both domestic and international providers among our membership, and we also accredit alternative providers. Alternative providers must meet the same standards as any other provider as they're going through the accreditation process. Next slide, please. Finally, we were asked to talk a little bit about content and content mastery. Melina, I'm going to turn to you in a moment just to talk a little bit about that and the evidence that we collect regarding that. Melina?
Yeah, so for one of our standards, for CAPE standard R1.2, we have the option for EPPs to choose how they want to provide their data for us for that particular component about content. And so depending on the state agreement, they can either use their SPA review process data. They may have a state review process that the state mandates or has that they're required to do, or they can provide evidence in their review of Standard 1 through their regular CAPE accreditation visit. And so in Connecticut, the SPA process is optional. If a EPP wants to use that SPA process and have their program recognized, they're able to do that. And then they're able to use some of that data from that process as part of their CAPE review. But if they don't choose to do a SPA, because CAPE doesn't require them to do SPAs, they can do evidence review of Standard 1, so that they can use data that they align from state or national content standards, and they provide that data as part of their CAPE review. We do have a few EPPs that have gone through the SPA process, and they are either not recognized or they're recognized with conditions, and they can still use their data from that process as part of their continuous improvement data for content for CAPE, because we are not looking at the recognition process, we're looking at the data and the outcomes process. So for an EPP that wants to do a SPA, we're just trying to support them in their efficiency. So if they want to use some of their data in their CAPE process, we allow that. Or if they choose not to do a SPA at all and are just doing the review of evidence for Standard 1, they would just align to state or national content standards and provide that data through their traditional CAPE review.
Great, thanks, Melina. That's broadly what CAPE does. We want to make sure we allowed ample time for questions today on anything that we covered or anything we didn't. We're here to answer all questions, so I'll pause there and just take any questions that you might have.
If you have a question online, you can click the raise your hand button there to signal that. All right, yeah, Kristen here in person.
Hi, so I just wanted to make sure I was understanding this last slide correctly. So the SPA data is optional. And either they can conduct the state review data or the evidence review of R1. So what does a typical submission look like? Like, is this test scores from a specific test? Is this test that they take during class? If you could elaborate more on what content and content mastery looks like when it's being given to you on your end as Kate.
Yeah, so for most EPPs, the state agreement will determine which of these three are options for them to use. So some states, the state review is the only option that they can use, and other states have all three in their in the agreement. So this is really where the data comes from. So the process that data comes from is one of these three kind of options. So for a traditional EPP, we would generally see, in order to meet the content component, they would have rubrics linked to the content standards. So they would have all of their curriculum kind of laid out, mapping to the CAPE standards, but also to the content standards in a particular area, let's say math ed. So they might have math standards that they're using. And they would provide data based on the rubrics and assignments that they have provided in their coursework. To meet those standards. So how are they actually meeting those standards within the within their curriculum? So we have that data. We also have a lot of EPPs utilize, Praxis 2 data. So they'll have some data on content pass rates for state tests or Praxis 2. We have other alignments within their curriculum to content. When they get to student teaching or in their clinical practice, there are alignments to content within that as well. So they are part of student teaching rubrics, for example, or evaluations. So all of that data is put together as part of the CAPE review for meeting this particular component.
Great. And then just a follow-up question. So it's determined by state. What does Connecticut have in its agreement?
So Connecticut has SPA and evidence review of standard 1, I believe. So either one of those two, they don't require that the EPPs go through SPAs, although many choose to do that because they want their programs to be recognized. And we allow them to obviously use that data as part of their CAPE process. But if they don't, they just go through the regular process of aligning to a set of national standards and providing that data that I just mentioned.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
We also look for patterns in data. So we look for 3 cycles of data to be included. The cycles are determined by the provider, but that ensures that we're not just looking at an aberration in data, but rather a pattern for what we collect.
And go ahead.
Thank you. I think just for clarification for the board, I also want to emphasize the need for reliability and validity of all the assessments and data being utilized. So that hasn't actually been mentioned, but that's a really critical part for the EPPs, that not only do we have instruments that are tied to standards, but that we have done a significant amount of work in terms of validating reliability and validity for all of the assessments that we utilize. And that is one of the reasons why something like Praxis is used in addition to other forms of assessments, because that's predetermined for validity and reliability.
Okay. Have any other questions in the room? Any additional questions online? I guess I have one more. Okay.
Last question for me, I promise. And then how often do institutions apply for accreditation or re-accreditation?
So accreditation is every 7 years. So if they have if they meet their accreditation standards, then they get a 7-year term. And if they have areas for improvement or stipulations that relate to a stipulation visit or they're on probation, then they have a visit in 2 years of that 7 years before they can continue. So we do have a mechanism if they're not meeting standards that they have to address in a shorter period of time, but generally it's 7 years.
Jennifer, go ahead.
Hi, Melina. It's Jennifer Delaney from Alternate Route to
Jennifer.
Certification. Hi. So I was hoping that something you could address, jumping off what Annie said. One of the things this group is considering is, let's say maybe somebody doesn't pass the Praxis 2 assessment. What are other ways that EPPs could look at the mastery of that? And one of the ideas that has been on the table that we're flirting with is around portfolio assessment. So I wanted to kind of have you all explain what the process would be like for EPPs to make sure that a portfolio assessment was valid and reliable and part of the quality assurance system, like that standard 5 area.
So when you talk about a portfolio system, are you talking about like something like EdTPA or something that is EPP created?
Yep, so we're talking about, something that's EPP created would have to meet the criteria for EPP created assessments. So we're looking at alternative pathways to the Praxis 2. And that's one idea, is some type of portfolio that would be EPP created.
So if an EPP wants to create sort of a portfolio process, which we have many EPPs that are choosing not to do a proprietary kind of assessment like a TPA or test scores, and they create something like a teacher work sample or something that the EPP is creating. We have several EPPs working as a consortium in some states, again, so that they can all use a similar instrument. So what they would have to do is create that portfolio. They would have to have rubrics and alignment with content and other state standards or CAPE standards. And then they would have to provide that data from that portfolio. And they would have to establish both reliability and validity if they are internally scoring. So the validity piece would be something they would go through prior. And the reliability piece they would have to establish through a pilot or initial phase-in of that instrument to establish the scoring mechanism and scale to make sure that that is consistent across all graders. So that would take quite a bit of time, obviously, to get that up and running, but the alignment is probably the most critical piece. So I don't know how many pieces of the components that you would have for that portfolio, but each one would probably be an individual rubric that is looking at the different documentations of that alignment in terms of the candidates being able to demonstrate those skills. So alignment and then pilot and then the reliability piece for scoring.
Right, and then doing it every 3 years too to keep up with the validity and reliability and current practices is the other piece that work has to be done every 3 years.
The validity, you can set the timeline for that. In terms of if you're not going to change the instrument at all, you can go a little bit longer, but most EPPs, there are changes within standards or expectations. And so they do make some changes. So as soon as you make changes to any of the components of that EPP created assessment, you'd have to go through and establish the validity again. And then the same thing with reliability, depending on how frequently it's being scored and how many people are scoring. So if you have 1 or 2 people that are consistently scoring, you can establish reliability and keep it for a little bit longer. If you have multiple people scoring multiple semesters, then it might be, that every semester or 2 you're having to recalibrate just to make sure because you have new reviewers and new scorers. But 3 years is probably a good estimate for both. If you put that in policy that's what you're going to do, then you can realign both the content and validity piece and then the reliability. So that would make sense.
Thank you, Melina.
Sure. Any further questions or clarification? Go ahead, Margaret.
Speak a little bit to the annual requirement for a program. So if they are awarded a 7-year term, for example, what evidence are they supplying on the annual basis? And then to Jennifer's question about a pathway using a portfolio type assessment, if there's something new that an accredited EPP uses, do they have to provide additional data in their annual report or whatever that mechanism is?
So they would report in their annual report that as part of their continuous improvement documentation. They wouldn't provide data, but they would talk about the process that they're doing. So we have EPPs that in their annual reports, they're really addressing their areas for improvement, any recommendations from their previous visit, completer numbers, and then any substantive change. So if they're changing programs, adding programs, deleting programs, they would have to let us know. If they are on probation with a regional accreditor, national accreditor, they would have to let us know that as well. And then there's a section for continuous improvement. So when they do make changes, they can document that there. If they have an AFI or area for improvement in an area like 5.2, which is where the creation of sort of a new assessment may come in, they could document it under that particular AFI. So it might be something they're doing as part of a response to an area for improvement they already have. And if they don't, it would be under the continuous improvement section of the annual report.
Annual reports are due in the spring of each year, just so you know. We begin collecting in January and usually finish in April or May. So.
Anne, go ahead.
Yeah, I
And
just
then
want to make
Rebecca.
Sorry, Rebecca. I just want to make a couple of other points. One is that typically we're trying to triangulate data as well. So it's not simply doing one either or of these things, but having a number of different data sources to meet particular standards or whatever. So again, I think what's really important here is, and thank you to the CAPE people for making this clear for a lot of people. We're in the EPPs, but a lot of people are not. How much the EPP itself has the decision making in terms of how they will both collect and triangulate data to show they're meeting certain standards. And that regardless of what we decide as a board, the freedom to be able to do that, both from a cost perspective as well as a reliability and validity perspective and all the other elements that go into it. I think it's really important for the EPP to have that discretion.
Yeah, EPPs have a lot of autonomy, and there's no cookie cutter way of doing it. Each EPP is unique, and they have their own set of multiple measures that they want to use, and so it really is very specific to the EPP, and there is a lot of autonomy within those EPPs to determine the best way to move forward.
Catherine? Oh, sorry, Rebecca is next, and then Catherine.
Thank you. This has been really helpful. I want to make sure I understand, and this might be a question back here. Given this information, as you see, like EPPs, as approved through CAPE, are held to a very specific standard. I'm uncertain why then we have the aspiring teaching candidates then held to an additional standard about their access to test score. Like why the extra step?
I think that's a conversation that is separate from this. We are only talking about CAPE and their accreditation. We can surely talk about that praxis portion when we are talking about our items for discussion.
Okay, let me rephrase it. For the CAPE team, when you look at states that do state review, instead of maybe SPA or evidence review of R1, as I think you've said, Connecticut is not a state reviewed state. What element or what, if it's a test or a portfolio, what are some of the practices that states are using for this review that EPPs are using to determine the standard?
So each state's a little bit different. We have some states that have a pretty robust state review process. So North Carolina is one of those. They have a dashboard for all their EPPs, and they have to meet certain state requirements on certain metrics in order to be continue their state approval. So they have, I think, 8 different metrics. So Praxis 2, I think, was one of them. And so they would have, certain benchmarks for what that is required for the state. We don't have those requirements, but at CAPE, but the state would have those in their state review process. And they also would have other dashboard measures. So in North Carolina, they have value add measures and others that they set benchmarks for meeting or exceeding expectations for EPP. So some of those state review processes are pretty robust, and others are really more of internal. Some states have visits where they actually go and do those visits with EPP and go through each program at a program level. And again, they have whatever their state requirements are. So some states do have the Praxis 2 requirement, and they have certain, again, benchmarks for that, and others don't. So it really is specific to each state.
Thank you.
Right, next is Catherine.
Thank you. And thanks, Milena, and for being here. It's Catherine Rowe. Nice to see you.
Hey.
So I just wanted to bring up a couple of things from my colleagues. And one of the things is that there are 6 different standards, but within those standards, there are multiple components. The EPP is responsible to provide multiple measures to basically evidence that we've met those components. I think that that's something important, because those standards unpack so that there's a multitude of evidence that's required. I mean, sometimes thousands of pieces of evidence. So it's not just, okay, we're going to do a praxis and we've met that. So that's a piece of it. But the praxis does have that evidence to document that the student has met mastery of content and the application of that content. And that's what theoretically that praxis is supposed to provide for us. The issue for most EPPs, especially in this financial climate, is that does the EPP have the capacity, i.e. the time and the funding, to be able to create their own valid and reliable instrument, and that thereby is really which makes the praxis a valid and reliable option for EPPs. So just kind of wanted to unpack that a little.
Yeah, so I think something nice about having some external or independent assessments is always nice in your multiple measures, because EPP can create their own assessments, and they create them and score them and do all their reliability and validity on them. But then it's also nice to have a multiple measure that's independent, right? So that Praxis 2 may be that independent measure that helps you to compare kind of what you're doing in-house and having another additional piece of information that is independent from the EPP. And so I think for a lot of EPPs, they look for some proprietary assessments that help do that, so that they can fortify what they're doing internally, but they're also getting kind of a validation measure from something external that is independent. So yes, I think it is very time consuming to create good EPP created assessments. And so, when we talk about EPP created assessments for all candidates and all programs, and so it is, thinking about those 3 to 6 assessments that you're creating that all candidates are able to provide information for. But then as a content program, you're also having additional assessments that only your content area does, right? So there can be quite a few assessments, as you mentioned, and a lot of data that supports the standards. But it's also nice to have some of those proprietary entities there that can give you some independent data as well.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, can you tell us more? You said there was like a consortium of different EPPs kind of working together to look at methods beyond just Praxis 2. Can you tell us more about this consortium?
Yeah, so in a couple of states, this really relates kind of to EdTPA. They've had some EdTPA states that required EdTPA, and then they didn't. And so they were trying to figure out what to do in its absence because it was no longer a state requirement. So New Jersey and New York are two that the EPPs were really working together to create a work sample that they could use, that many EPPs could use, so not just one. And they were working together. So in New York, they were working around St. John Fisher, which is a private university, that were working on a teacher work sample together with others that they were all going to use. New Jersey was still working on, they have a consortium group. I don't know what they wind up deciding to do, but they were looking in the same direction as creating something that all the EPPs could work on together, or at least a large group of them. Because again, it shares the load of doing some of that reliability and validity work independently. They can do that as a consortium. So those are two states that I've seen that. Tennessee is also one that is, they look at working together. They just work collaboratively. And so they'll share their documents. And I've seen over the years that they just kind of have merged into a few key assessments that many of the EPPs can utilize. And again, it's sharing that workload.
Thank you.
And Melina does, do Ohio and Virginia also have consortia for assessment?
Yeah, Virginia has a pretty strong consortia as well. You know, you can tell one EPP something and they all know because they all meet pretty frequently. And I meet with them as well. And they'll ask a lot of questions and try and, again, create surveys or instruments that they can all use that, again, share the load.
I think we have a representative from our legal department.
Hi, folks. Thank you. I'm just for background. My name is Matt Van Horst. I'm a lawyer with the Department of Education. So I'm not an educator, and I'm going to plead ignorance. But maybe I just have a clarifying question. Maybe others are wondering the same thing. And just sort of stepping back a little, it seems to me that there are sort of two different realms, if you will, that we're dealing with, right? One is the educator prep institutions and the accreditation requirements and CAPE requirements and the 7-year cycle and so on and so forth. But then on the other hand, we have educator licensure. And I heard that I think CAPE is involved with both. I know you said that you don't do licensing, and so when we talk about this minimum content knowledge requirement, because that's something that's key to what this board will be working on over the next several years, really. That minimum content knowledge requirement can exist either in the EPP realm, so that is, in order to graduate from an institution of higher education, the student has to satisfy whatever requirements are in place on the part of the institution. But wholly separate and apart from that are the licensure requirements, right? So what is right now, it's the State Board of Education. What does the state board require in order for an applicant who may or may not be a graduate of one of those institutions to be certified, right? And so maybe just at a high level, and just to address my ignorance, if nothing else, right? Can somebody just speak to those worlds and how minimum content applies in those two separate contexts? Or maybe they're more joined together than I'm imagining. Thank you.
I can take a stab here, Melina. If you think there's something that you could add, let me know. I guess as a former commissioner, so I was a commissioner in Illinois, we of course had content standards and licensure requirements, right? At the time, we did not have an accreditation requirement, but it's great if there's alignment somewhat, because CAPE scope here is we look at any program, right, that's preparing an individual for license. So obviously, it's easier for a provider if there's alignment that they can see how someone's going to meet those requirements within their program so that they can be licensed, right? So it would be of concern to CAPE, for example, if we had a provider who was preparing a lot of individuals, none of whom were able to be licensed. That's going to be a red flag and something that would come up with an accreditation review. Also, just from the standpoint of having previously overseen some of this work at the state level, I wanted to speak a bit about content, right? So when our General Assembly in Illinois would pass a requirement for, we need content standards for science, generally speaking, the state would look first at the Specialized Professional Association national standards, because there was a lot of agreement around such standards. A lot of people had put a lot of time into those. And then if necessary, the state would tweak from there. And that was generally acceptable to our General Assembly. Melina, is there anything else you would say about the alignment that I'm missing that might help clarify that question from Matthew?
Yeah, so I think that, we're accrediting programs that have the ability to recommend licenses. And then the state may have additional requirements for licensure that are not, they may be part of a possible review. So for example, we have a cohorted 3.0 grade point average in one of our standards that's checked somewhere in the program, right? So that that's in there because the state might have a requirement for a 275 in order to get a license, right? So the program is preparing those candidates to make sure they're meeting whatever the state licensing requirement is, right, in terms of GPA. So GPA licensing tests, the fee they pay, the licenses they're eligible for, all those on the state side are something that the candidate then has to apply for that license and meet those criteria. So the EPP is preparing them as far as they can with the requirements, to be eligible for a license, and then it's up to them to meet whatever the additional state requirements there are for licensure. So they're together but separate.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
So I would just add the comment, you please correct me if I'm wrong, but so it would clearly be insufficient if the board were to, for example, just modify the minimum content requirements of the EPP, right? They would simultaneously have to, if those requirements are still in place to receive licensure, then the candidate would clearly still have to satisfy them, right? So you kind of have to address both buckets, right?
Right.
Thank you. Maybe that's obvious to everybody else, but it wasn't to me, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at this time? Jen, do you have your hand up?
No, thank
Catherine
you.
does. Catherine, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to, just want to respond to what was just said. The accreditation and the certification are almost parallel universe. However, they are intertwined and somewhat interdependent. I think that's an important piece. The certification requirements for the state do drive some of our documentation of evidence, right? For mastery, for student teaching hours, for transition points, meaning students have been monitored to make sure that we are putting them through a program that gives them the breadth and depth of knowledge. But I don't think that, just going back to what you said, while the certification requirements could drive the accreditation requirements could also hold the students to a specific standard. So I think to say that they're parallel yet somewhat interdependent, I think that makes sense, and hopefully that was clear enough. But I just don't want you to think that the accreditation does not serve for a certification, right? That the accreditation is on the EPP, it's on the Educator Preparation Program, and what keeps us providing the rich programs that we provide, right? And we have to evidence that. Certification is what the candidate needs to exemplify to meet those state mandated certification requirements.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments at this time? Okay, seeing none, I want to say thank you for coming and providing the presentation, and thank the members here of the board for asking very thoughtful questions and getting clarification to build that understanding for the board as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciated the time today.
Next on our agenda is items for discussion. Discussion of shared ideas for alternative routes for certification. Also develop recommendations related to B13A3, Public Act number 2441, and regulation materials provided once as part of the agenda in meeting with that organization. So would you be able to pull up that working document?
Sorry, I didn't have it open already.
We'll be able to ask each person who puts something in there to kind of speak to it. Get an understanding of what was being presented or where the idea is stemming from.
What was the title of this document? What's that be?
Sorry, it was the working document that she sent to us prior to our last
I'm trying to pull it up. So
special meeting.
It wasn't in this document.
No. It was one to be pushed to the next meeting because we didn't have time in the special meeting to review it.
I'm gonna try to open everything before, but of course I didn't open this one.
That one also is on the
Not the shared document.
not shared document, right?
No.
Okay.
Should.
Does anybody have it?
Can somebody repeat the file name?
We're looking for it right now.
Yes, I have it open. It is Connecticut Educator Preparation Certification Board 1. And would I be able to just put this into the chat? And that way if someone has access to it.
Or you could just reply to the,
It was sent on Friday, January 24th.
No, they're mailing me phones.
For anyone who's looking for it, but I don't have everyone on here. Let's see.
I got it. I can.
I'm going to reply all, and the people who are on here will get it. You know, when this was sent, the hot topic was the report we had to submit by January 31st. So a lot of what's on here, I think, served as a space or platform for people to continue the conversation around that, is what it looks like.
With that in mind, if everybody can open it up and nobody edit what you put in there so that it's specific to discussing ideas for alternative routes to certification.
Yeah.
So why don't we give everybody about 5 minutes? Anyone who entered in any notes in there to maybe update it to reflect that so it's more concise and that we can work through that, staying on target for that particular item. When did you say it was emailed originally?
It was sent on January 24th, Friday, January 24th. I do have some things noted in here under my name.
To access it, please. Do you want me to remove the card? Regretfully, I will be out to work. And then also put on. Does anyone still need additional time to review? I'll set a timer if needed.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and set the timer for about 5 minutes. And we return to that.
Is the link, are we putting the link up here to review? Are we all trying to review on our own?
I think you have to review on your own because in order for you to edit the document, you have to be in the document. You have to request your own code that gets sent to you.
Was the document emailed? Because I'm having trouble with Teams opening the document in
I'll
the
email
chat.
it to you.
Thank you.
Email it out to everyone, please.
Yes, Chloe's doing that right now.
Right, it was sent out as a shared document, so we would have to enter a sort of verification code. That was the issue I had.
Right, you enter in your email address and then a verification code is sent to your email and you just copy and paste that in and then you have access to that.
Send it over. I'm sending it right now. I'm sorry, I'm trying to do like 5 things.
Or CP.
Everyone should have it.
Chloe said that everyone should have it at this time. If you click on the link, it'll ask you for your email address, then you will get a code. Thank you. Anyone else not have it? Check all. Okay, that's our 5 minutes. You guys had a chance to adjust their notes in there. We're gonna go ahead and just kind of go from the top and move our way down. So Patrice, do you want to go ahead and speak to what you have in there, and then we'll move down with each person. Here at the end, we will ask additional questions, because I think what you'll find is that there might be some repetitiveness in what is being presented by different entities. So we're gonna wait for questions towards the end, after everybody's had an opportunity to kind of share their ideas.
So my comments have been addressed by the fact that we didn't try to rush this through at our last meeting. To get the reflections of the others.
So should I just change this to? It doesn't matter. All right, thank you. And then Cynthia, I think you have 2 comments in here.
I can't see them yet.
Do you want to use my computer?
Want to skip me and I'll be right there?
Sure, absolutely. Kristen, I think you were next.
Yes, okay, so in my comment, I was referencing the language of the stuff that was due on January 31st. And like Patrice, I wanted to make sure that we were getting it done right and not rushing into an agreement. So that's why I emphasized in the first part, we want to determine whether alternative approaches should be offered. And then what we had discussed, based on the second CPRL presentation, was in addition to the existing assessment. So everyone takes Praxis 2, but then there's also the ETS alternate passing option. We talked about portfolio. They talked about relevant degree. So we were looking at things in addition to existing assessments. And a thing I would like to add there is that in the wording of the law, when they say alternative approaches, it doesn't necessarily advocate for replacing Praxis. It would just offer additional ways to show that minimum content knowledge.
Great, next we have Anne.
Thanks. So I was in agreement with Kristen. I was pretty much suggesting that the statute language needs to address process more than specifics. And I think that's really important in terms of the EPPs. And what I noted here was keeping candidates taking appropriate content exams through Praxis 2 and Foundations of Reading, because it provides baseline data for CAPE and is necessary to And we're looking at 85% of our candidates doing this already, are passing that. But to have the option to retake if failed the first time, which we already have that in elementary, but not all the others. And for elementary cert, you know, trying, as with the one SEM now available, maybe trying to push ETS for more of that option. But the bottom line here is that the EPP knows the candidate best. And it really is critical that the EPP should assess how content knowledge of the candidate has been assessed and whether it exists. And then those options should offer guidance. They know their candidates. Then following up by CSD as to the efficacy of the alternatives they employ. So I think, again, it's a process thing. It's saying the EPPs have the right to make the assessment of content. It's guided by and substantiated by the CAPE requirements of validity and reliability in terms of how they're assessing that content, which is fine. It's triangulated through that. And then once that's done, then the licensure piece following up, that's really another thing that didn't come up is there's also EPPs prepare people outside of Connecticut as well, right? So I really feel like the EPPs need to have the responsibility of how they assess content, and that the law should reflect that kind of flexibility, regardless of what they decide.
Thank you. Shannon is not here today, correct? So, I mean, I can read what she has listed here, but I don't think I'll just speak to it. But it might be in line with what many people have. She'd written, for those who are watching this online, I agree with Cynthia, Kristen, and Anne. Ari, the suggestion that we as a board have discussed possible recommendations as to whether alternative approaches should be offered to allow candidates to demonstrate such minimum content knowledge. And we would aim to have proposed statutory language ready to contribute to the placeholder bill focused on the education certification in time for the current session. My thought is that we would draft the markup language in such a way that we optimize flexibility in statute and spelling out specifics, more guidelines developed and maintained by the board. So we're not locked in via statute or regs. Language along the lines of no later than July 1st, 2026, when the current regs sunset. Connecticut Education Corporation and Certification Board shall approve and disseminate guidelines outlining how candidates for education may demonstrate minimum content knowledge within their endorsement area. The methods approved by the certification board shall include, but must not be limited to, with some articulation commitments to a regular cadence for reviewing these guidelines as a board to ensure they continue to align to prevailing research and there aren't any unintended consequences emerging as a result of a certain guideline. The result of the statutory amendment would likely be an exercise in cleaning up, making language consistent, i.e. removal of reference to specific state board of education approval, assessment referenced, and replacement with something along the lines of satisfying the requirements for demonstrating minimum content knowledge as established by the Connecticut Education Corporation. So that's what she has in there as hers. Jen Delaney.
Hi. Yes, I have a few things to mention here and then some questions for everybody. So I do propose that we really consider that standard error of measure, even 2 standard errors of measure for various reasons. You know, it's just it's hard to justify having somebody when they're off by just a few points retaking that test multiple times. And then, like I'd said earlier about the portfolio, you know, I do think it could be an option, but the EPPs really have to decide whether or not they have the capacity on staff and funding to be able to create that portfolio to what it needs to be to meet the CAPE criteria for EPP created assessments. And I also think that, it's really important to keep in mind that, especially in my focus, because I'm a grad program, so they have to have a bachelor's degree minimum to get into our program, and so we have the benefit in that case of being able to look at their bachelor's degree and what kind of coursework they've done. So if somebody is coming into our program and they want to do, let's say they want to do science. They have to take the Praxis 2 in science and pass that. But if they had a certain number of science credits with a certain GPA attached to that came from an accredited institution, we can certainly consider that as what meets the minimum criteria for content area success. And I think especially we have to think about the people that we're trying to attract to our program. To our programs in the state, and who we're looking to match and mirror the students of our state, right? So we have to consider that these standardized tests are not made for everyone, right? They're not, that we have people who grew up in low socioeconomic status, BIPOC candidates, linguistically diverse candidates, especially those who their first language is not English, people who, just don't test well or came from a school system in our state that doesn't have traditionally high performing standardized test rates. And so there's, we're trying to close that racial, ethnic teacher student gap in our state. And we have to consider that they're coming to us. We're looking to bring them into our fold because they have the soft skills and they have the cultural understandings that are not measured on a Praxis 2, right? But they took all this content area coursework. So I really want to explore more how heavily we can weigh in a bachelor's degree or coursework at the bachelor or graduate level in a content area. So that's really important to me, especially, as somebody who I fit most of those. I'm a Latina, I'm the first generation American, first generation college student. Many of my family do not have a high school diploma. I had teen parents. I was a teen mom. I had to take this test multiple times. So I really understand what it's like to be in that position where, look where I am now, right? That test could have kept me from moving forward in this career. And so I really want to explore more that standard error of measure, even if it's something that we're looking at for only grad programs or the bachelor's degree component for only grad programs. But there's definitely ways that we can kind of, considering that alternate route, like the whole point of alternate routes is it's for people that the traditional pathway does not exist. Just like we have alternative programming for high school students who the traditional day doesn't work for them. We have adult ed programs because we don't expect people who have families and children to go to school during the day with teenagers, right? So we have alternative programming all over our pre-K-12, sphere. And so considering maybe we don't have a blanket, like the way it is now, there's just a blanket approach to getting your certification. Maybe there's multiple options for different types of programming. So that's one thing I wanted to explore. And I know I sound like a broken record, but going back to the ACTFL testing, we do have to look at this at some point because world language is a shortage area. And, especially when we're thinking of grad programs and bringing people in who are immigrants to our country, we've had at least at my program, several like engineers that came from other countries who, do science or tech ed or different types of programs that we have, math. And so, we have to consider the standardized testing in other countries aren't the same as ours too. So that's something I forgot to mention earlier. That's another piece of that degree and coursework we need to look at. But then the ACTFL tests, there's for intermediate, for like Portuguese, Spanish, German, Italian, French, they have to have advanced low. But then for the other world languages, they can score lower than that, intermediate high. And so I wanted to kind of bring in Colt and maybe Dr. Olivero to talk about those passing rates on the ACTFL, because my understanding is, and this is not my program, because my program, you have to pass it before you come in, but my understanding is there's a lot of undergrad programs where that ACTFL pass rate is preventing them from getting into a classroom. So, you know, although I'm here representing ARC, I'm our alternative programs, I want to look at everything together, because anything we're doing that's keeping people that are like right on that zone of proximal development and right there, that a standardized test is keeping them from progressing. I want to go back to what Annie was saying and Catherine, is that they're in the CAPE standards 1, 2, and 3, there are several components in there where we are watching them at ARC and in the other PPPs for that content area knowledge, and they're getting scored at several points throughout the program. So if we can maybe not weigh a standardized test so heavily to be that threshold to and that gateway to getting into the profession, I think would really serve us well moving into the future. And then the questions I have for this committee is, you know, I'm very curious as to what other people think or about alternative routes to certification, and maybe there's types of
I'm gonna hold
alternative.
off questions till the end, once everybody has had a chance to present what they added.
Oh,
to
sure,
the-
sure.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So that's
Dr.
what,
Rich, we had
what
to
I had
skip
written
over
in there.
you.
I'm also.
Are you ready to, and then we'll continue in the list. I just don't want to go too far down.
Sure. So I had two things. Again, these are old and outdated. I wasn't sure we were going back to this form today. So my request originally was to be included as a group to make sure we saw what we were writing to submit to legislation. I'm going to ask again that when we have minutes of meetings, could we have that attached to the minutes if that was an action item that we accomplished together, just so we all can see what is going out. And then today I shared additional language that I thought we would talk about today. And I don't know if that could be something that can be shared or added to this draft. It was additional language from CPRL that suggestions on how to create the legal authority for alternatives who might not be able to pass the praxis. And I thought it could be a discussion item for today.
And then people, I'll pull off my questions. So Kristen already went, Anne already went.
It's Rebecca.
Shannon we read, Jen already went. And Rebecca, there you go.
What we currently have in place, even with the recent flexibilities, is not expanding our teaching workforce. And so I recommend that in our current legislation, like this round, we have a placeholder right now, and this is a budget year, which would be very important. Anywhere that it says achievement of a satisfactory score is determined by the State Board of Education on the appropriate State Board of Education approved subject area assessment, just be shifted and changed to satisfaction of the minimum content knowledge standards established by this board. So it actually holds in that we are in a timely way, like coming up with what is going to be needed for our talent departments to be able to turn that around in a short amount of time. I also believe, as many people have shared, that EPPs should determine how they assess content knowledge and should be given that autonomy, given that we are a state that only uses approved EPPs via CAPE. I do not believe we need additional checkpoints anymore. I think back in the day, they might have been needed, but now that we are all, that EPPs are under CAPE, we don't need the additional checkpoints. Like the clinical hours are a responsibility within CAPE. You don't have to add more of that. You don't need the additional testing. You don't need the GPA. That's all within the EPPs already through CAPE. And so we're just doing a double step, which I just don't think is a great use of resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine?
Yeah, I'd love to go back to what you just said, because I wasn't quite sure. So when we can unpack that a little bit when we go to questions. So if I could just put that out there, because I'm not quite sure about the duplicity piece. I have to say, first and foremost, the assessments, the praxis is not what's preventing people to come into the profession, right? At Western Connecticut State University, we're a HSI, and we have the third highest praxis scores in the state. So I just want to put that out there. As far as alternative or some flexibilities, if you will, the standard error of measure is 6 to 9 points. So I think if we start to expand that, when you're looking at, when you start looking at these cut scores, nearly 10 points, I think that is significant. And the other piece about the praxis is that it's not only the ability for us to assess mastery of content knowledge, but it's also the application of that content knowledge. So there's a little bit of methods thrown in there too. And I think that, getting into an assessment and looking at it would be really helpful. I want to go back to the CPRO report. The CPRO folks were at the council last year, and they created and they provided research for us, but I don't think that was intended to move into statute as is. I think it was just some theoretical underpinnings for the people on the council that were not up to date on certain research factors. I think that's what that piece is. And I do want to go back, even though it's kind of early, to thank Rebecca, because I do think that the onus is on the EPPs to make the determination.
And then Sarah? Sarah, are you there?
Yes, sorry. I apologize
No
for the
worries.
delay. I actually think I need to correct myself because it looks like it's only endorsements where the grade span is 4 through 12 now, not regular certification. Is that correct? I was just concerned. I think grades 4 to 12 is such a large grade band that I wanted to consider getting some content area expertise as we look at the alternative routes. I also wanted to just say I do think portfolio is a valid option. And finally, I wanted to say I do think the EPPs also we want to rely on their expertise.
Right, so then it becomes, the general themes, it sounds like, is that many are focused on keeping praxis to with an additional route. And then there's some conversation around the autonomy for that knowledge. So the question then, I'm going to put it out to anyone who wants to ask a question about something that was presented. And then we will continue on. Are there any questions? Go ahead, Margaret.
I have a question that's probably more centered for the SDE staff. You could just speak a little bit to what happens currently with non-US candidates for degrees and certifications. I believe Fox Early Childhood aligns with you for using these equivalency reports. What happens at the teacher certification level?
So are you talking about if someone
Yeah.
to confirm my understanding, you're asking if someone applies for certification and they're coming from outside the US, what the requirements are?
Are you able to hear her?
Or if they're looking,
You could press the button, turn to green.
Make sure.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
so an individual who has a non-US degree in certification. Because we're talking about how to expand the pool and we do have a large number of non-US degree folks right now. So just some clarification about the use of the equivalency reports and how you use that. What are the steps that someone would have to go through?
To obtain certification, they still have to be, we don't have interstate agreement, obviously, so they have to come in under the traditional of a computer program, now maybe they completed a program in their country, or they have experience to waive, which is always done, so they have to do that. Then we still have to do the course by course analysis. They need to have a bachelor's degree, they need to have content area,
which can be met with testing or by the 30 credits. They have to have the specific areas of professional education, so the secondary 18 credits. Usually the thing we run into is often a lot of our gen eds that we do, that's not part of it. They do that before they go out to college. So we all do certainly the U.S. history, but a lot of times they might come in and take English or math and science, because by the time they get to college, they're all professional science education. So those people often have to do additional coursework. And they do have to take tests, so there are no international tests that we can accept. They have to pass praxis too. It can be deferred in state, but you have to meet the praxis for capital. Let's just say.
So does the NACE's equivalency report give you enough detail to be able to identify what they will need? Or do they need to go through a college?
So are you with the foreign credential analysis? So yeah, so that foreign credential analysis will tell us, do they have the equivalent of a US bachelor's degree? Because a bachelor's degree in, let's say, a country may not be equivalent. 3 years, right? So that will tell us whether they have a bachelor's degree. And then we require them to submit a course by course evaluation. So we can see, okay, let's say they take a math course, how many credits? And so, yeah, we use that. All those credits awarded right now, when we look at transcripts from anyone, we don't look at the grades. It's still credit counts. So we didn't say whether we would look somebody in the state or out of the country. That report is sufficient for us to determine, we're going to count the number of credits. Do they have a major? Do they have specific areas met? And this.
Do you have any data on non-US applicants?
Data such as.
Is there an increasing trend applying? Are there barriers that we should work?
I would say I've been in certification for 15 years. We've always had a fair number of people come in from outside the country. We very often, and they will pursue applicants. And I don't think I've seen a tremendous increase or decrease. I think it's stayed pretty stable. There's definitely interest. I don't think the only barrier is, again, that the gen eds become a problem for them. Because what we do in the first 2 years of college, very often in other countries, they do in their high school. So that's probably the biggest barrier I see for them, is they have to go in and that they English and math and a science, and that's taught us that they don't have those gen eds. They don't have necessarily the major in math. Their college coursework was all professional. It was all pedagogy. So that can be challenging for them. The main thing that is nice is if they did complete the program, though, in statute it says if you complete a program and you can take that praxis too in lieu of the major. So we rely on that a lot. That praxis too is a way to meet the content and having the major that we take additional classes.
Okay, that's super helpful. I know at OEC we pass a lot of folks your way who have come to us and said, I was certified to teach in my country, and now they're coming to teach in preschool and saying, you should have the conversation with us.
Yeah, we've a fair amount of people. I mean, it's definitely great interest there.
Thank you. One thing I also wanted to kind of speak to is I think that when we're thinking about the work that we're doing here, this kind of concept of, certification is keeping people out of the profession. Based on the surveys and the data, what's keeping students out of the profession going into the program has a lot to do with the result, which is that they do not get paid enough money going into the fields where the starting pay is less than $50,000 for a bachelor's degree in most of the states. That has been that area, though there are a lot of barriers to people who are within the program trying to figure out how to move past it and do those things. One of the big items, so much so that UPPs, my understanding, are seeing a decline in people entering into their programming and thus actually getting rid of some of their education programming. So that's even happening before having the number of folks going into UPPs for education programming. So there's something happening before that. So we're gonna kind of leave it with that, and if we're gonna move into any additional questions or comments about what was stated here in our potential recommendations or ideas. One thing that we should be doing is entertaining a motion from the group at some point in terms of, is it our intent to move forward with Praxis 2 and an alternative route with some language of flexibility that I think CPRL had presented as a possibility. And then within that, having some conversations there and setting up an ad hoc committee that would continue that work with an admin from the State Department of Education to create the language for regulation or legislation. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Jennifer, that was a lot. I want to just make sure that the statement that you made about why Black educators are or aren't going into the profession, there's a lot of research that would dispute a little bit of what you just shared, that it's not just actually based on the pay. And when you start breaking it down by racial, ethnic, and linguistic demographics, the research would be a bit different. So I'm curious to kind of where that is coming from beyond like a general, teachers do not get paid enough. On the record, they do not get paid enough at all. But I do definitely, like within our state, it has been made very clear that the pathway into certification has multiple barriers that has decreased. And once flexibilities have been introduced, it has actually opened up in getting more educators into the profession. So I think it's a both and into your sharing. Can we? You just said there's going to be an ad hoc committee.
We're gonna, in a moment, we're gonna be talking about that. But before we can get that, I think we need to have a motion as to, one, wrap up any more questions for the group in terms of what they presented. And then a motion to, one, this committee, what their intent is. So is our intent to keep Praxis 2 and find alternative routes, adopt alternative routes, use the flexible language that CPRL might have presented. And then once that is done, deciding on if we, based on our bylaws, establishing an ad hoc committee who would then work with our admin and legal team from the State Department of Education to crafting regulation language to present to the group about that, based on what our general consensus is on things that we'd like to see.
What's that timeline in your mind?
I mean,
like for this legislative session to draft for this
we
one?
will not be drafting anything for this legislative session.
Why have we voted on that?
Because we already discussed it at the last meeting with Laura, and the way that it was presented is that we have missed the deadlines. And there will not be legislation presented because we're not going to rush that work in 3 to 4 meetings to get that done.
And
I remember correctly, it was due to missing things with the Connecticut State Board of Education meetings, like.
they just did their concept meeting. There's a placeholder for our work.
I already spoke with Representative Lieber and explained where we are currently in this process, and that we have to present to the State Board of Education, and we will be presenting in the next session or going to the regulations route. So she is already aware of that.
Today I did present a possible route for us to consider to from legislation forward. But I think we need to back up to be in agreement with what we are doing with Praxis. From what I heard and thought I heard from CPRL and from this group, that people agreed Praxis could be the first step. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
And then our next step would be to consider alternatives. So I think we're all in agreement in there. My question would be, was that presented in the letter that went forward, our first homework assignment to the legislature? How was that? We haven't seen that. So how was that presented?
I mean, I haven't seen it either, so I couldn't tell you specifically how it was presented, but that will be getting shared with us as.
Who wrote the letter then?
They do. We We approve what's going to be in it, which is what we did and we voted on, and then they craft the formal letter that moves forward.
Yeah, I just took what was voted upon and put it together and then just wrote an introduction based on this is what is included.
Was that shared with most people, or is it gonna be shared?
It will be shared. I just wanted to
we're
forward
just saying.
middle email.
Seems like we want to see what goes out before it goes out. I think it seems to be a common theme here.
There, nothing was added to it that was not voted on. I don't want anyone to worry about that. Like, I didn't add anything, or like the department didn't add anything that wasn't voted upon.
Could you read off what it says?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the only reason why I didn't share it was because I wanted to only have to send one email instead of, I didn't want to confuse anyone. Yeah. So, let me just pull it up.
Because I think one of our last motions at the last meeting was your suggestion to do like that really flexible language that we are looking into the alternative methods. Yeah, I think that was the last motion.
Right, but I know I didn't within that say like not to move anything forward this legislative session, but I do.
But that's what
Laura.
Yeah, that's what.
When she presented, stated in that meeting. I'm told that. Exactly.
And the sunset date is July 1 or June 30th, 2026.
2026, correct. And last year, for friends who were not on the committee last year, we spent the entire year building consensus and drafting together what that work would be. We provided what we wanted, and then the State Department and April crafted the regulation or the legislation, and then we reviewed that, provided comment to that, and then it was approved and moved forward. So for us to kind of just push that forward, we've already been told that we have lost the deadline for this stuff. It feels a bit rushed, and we want to make sure that we are using the resources that we are supposed to be using, which is the State Department of Education's department, and crafting this stuff. And then we move forward with evaluating that and ensuring that it meets the needs of the board and the message they want to send before that happens. And then it goes to the Board of Education, and it can sit with them for 60 days. So that's why we've lost those guidelines, which is what Laura had presented to us the last meeting.
Okay, I'm not sure. It doesn't feel rushed to me because we're dealing with stuff that's decades old. So I recognize it might feel rushed to you if because of the placeholder that is there right now, there are going to be changes made. And if we are not informing upon those in some way, I just worry that then we're going to be in this responsive space. But so just for us as board members to know, like, there's probably going to be some changes, and there is going to be, and it would probably be helpful if we gave some type of, as Cynthia had shared, with some draft language to the co-chairs, both chairs of the education committee, as like, hey, as something comes in, this might be helpful.
So I appreciate that thought there. However, when speaking with the representative, she'd say there was nothing on their docket for certification operation. And I told her that we were not going to be moving forward at this time, but that we would have things available in the coming session. So she is well aware. And I will say that as the chair, should there be anything that is put forward that the board does not approve of or finds is lacking in public participation, that members will be speaking to that it did not come from this board. So we want to make sure that we are working within the board to present that information and ensuring that the message is the board's message and not individual entities. So that's time we're not going to be. We are also looking at moving this through regulations, and as part of the email that we sent, I believe that there was 2 kind of flow charts in there on how we can also present information to regulations this year prior to the next legislative meeting as well. I keep thinking that someone's raising their hand. Sorry.
There is a hand. Oh, there is. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ann.
Thanks. I was just going to recommend in the notes that we went over before, Shannon Merriman's it gave some suggested language, which I thought was particularly helpful, the not later than July 1st, 2026, to disseminate, that we would disseminate guidelines outlining how candidates for certification can demonstrate minimum content knowledge, and shall include but not be limited to. We could certainly put shall include praxis to, but not be limited to that, and leave our options open. So it's really process language. So we've already got like a template of what I think would be helpful, that Shannon put in those notes.
Thank you, Anne. Is there anyone else who wants to talk about the notes that are in here? Go ahead, Teresa.
I do just want to point out that since the Education Committee at their meeting in January did raise an concerning certification as a concept, there will be a public hearing on that topic. So what's being said at that public hearing, we can't predict, but somehow, whether it's officially through this board or some other means, I think would be helpful to have the language around, we're looking for flexibility, not going back and revisiting and relitigating where we were 25 years ago.
Anyone else?
The draft I shared from about possible legislative changes, can that be shared with everybody as a working document as we collaborate together?
We're actually going to hold on that for a moment, because we're going to be setting up an ad hoc group who will then work with our legal team to possibly use that as a draft or a foundation, and do some work within that for the next meeting.
The point of this committee is to have a bunch of diverse stakeholders that would work together to collaborate on it. So I'm not sure why a separate subcommittee that work would happen when we have all of the different perspectives that should take a look.
Because the subcommittee would then be able to work with the admin on crafting that information, which is much of the work that we also did last year, where we separated into smaller groups, and as we did with the bylaws as well. So this would allow us, because there's actually, we're going to be going into, if we kind of table that for a moment, we're going to be going into the requirements of the next deadline, the next 2 items. And within that, we're going to be kind of splitting up the group to work on those areas so that we are moving forward with your regulations process or legislation process in the next round. So we're going to be doing that work here, and then you would bring that to the group with that information to ensure. Currently, when you have the rough draft, my understanding is that is one perspective. Who was involved in drafting that?
Legal team at CEPRL.
Okay. And who?
Multiple attorneys to give this committee.
And did this
suggestions
board
to look
request that?
But no, actually, yes, because today we were supposed to come with suggestions for the next steps. So this was the work to be done for suggestions for next steps.
The board was supposed to come up with their ideas and suggestions for the next step, but the board did not request the entity of CEPRL to draft legislation.
They didn't draft legislation, they drafted suggestions for this committee to consider like they've done before. So my ask is,
right, but
everyone just see it.
The committee requested it. Yes.
The
The committee requested in previous meetings to have CEPRL here we requested that CEPRL audit that information and present that information to the board. So any of those kinds of things that has to be done here for us to make those decisions. I'm not sure that we would be asking without the knowledge of the entire board to have that done.
I really am quite confused.
I am as well.
If we are to bring ideas for discussion,
correct,
why does it matter who helps inform us develop those ideas? We don't come here as individual representatives. We all represent constituencies. We have access to various resources, but bringing some suggested language seems to me to, or any of us, help move our discussion forward.
Right.
Drafting by committee is never a good idea.
Yeah, I agree with Patricia. I'm really confused, and I agree. I mean, CEPRL is there to assist us, particularly in areas in which I have no expertise, and most of us don't, in terms of drafting language that we want to reflect what we're trying to do. I don't understand.
We were supposed to come with our ideas. We didn't say that we're going to have drafted language. And as stated in the previous meetings where we asked CPRL as a board to look into alternative routes, what other states were doing, that was a decision that the board made with that entity. So when we're asking an entity like CPRL, that should be a decision of the board to be done.
More members of the like advisory committees, if CPRO represents so many voices across Connecticut, given their like advisory committees, that and it would be just I'm sure when you're bringing ideas, you're talking to a bunch of constituents and people that you represent. That's what's happening. So it is a quite confusing why it'd be okay for some of us to like get feedback from other people, but not from CPRO.
Yeah, I'm confused.
I'm basing it off of the work that we did last year and the work that we've done so far. And
CPRO was part of that.
Correct, but they were at the table and we were telling them as a board what we wanted in there. And then they took that information back and then they adjusted and presented the legal language to us. That's not what happened here. So at this point,
we're bringing it forward. I mean, I would like to see the document.
We're going to stop there. We're going to stop there and we're going to move forward because we are going to be developing some committees to do work on the different areas that are in here.
Teresa, go ahead. Feel that subcommittees are not necessary. Can we agree that we would do the work as a group of the whole?
What do the bylaws currently say?
So we would have to vote to create an ad hoc, hold on.
What?
If it's a standing committee, you have to vote on its creation. Give me 2 seconds. For ad hoc committees shall be formed at the discretion of the chairperson. Membership to these committees shall be designated by the chairperson. In making designations, the chairperson shall appoint a voting member to serve as the chairperson. So there's a difference between a standing committee, which is ongoing and would exist, indefinitely. So a standing committee would require 2/3 vote approval of the board. An ad hoc committee shall be formed at the discretion of the chairperson. Section 4 of the bylaws.
We have a couple of areas and deadlines that need to happen. So we were going to have the ad hoc committees kind of, there's an area that you have an affinity to be a part of, and then present to the board what it is that you are seeing or what you would like to do, and then the board would then provide feedback, adjustments to language, and those sorts of things. So we can get through as much of this as possible so we are able to present legislation or to the regulations board moving forward. So with that in mind, we have this part. I'm sorry.
Hands. There are hands up.
Okay.
Catherine is
Catherine, go
first.
ahead.
Jennifer,
Catherine.
yeah, so so Jennifer already kind of started to speak to what I wanted to talk to. So at the council last time, yes, we did break up into different groups, but I will tell you how the legislative move forward did not necessarily represent what was discussed in my subgroup. So that I do appreciate the opportunity for an ad hoc committee to present to us. I think we're a small enough group that we could collaborate on these things. I'm not sure if an ad hoc committee is necessary, but I'm not going to speak to that. I just thank you for the opportunity to share what the ad hoc comes up with before it moves forward. That's all.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Ann.
I disagree. I just feel that this is going to slow what is already feeling like a slow process. And given the size of the committee and the representative, for example, there are only maybe 3, 4 EPPs represented on this entire board, which I understand, but it's going to be really important to have all those voices, I think. And I just don't see the need also for separating out the to ad hoc committees, just putting it out there.
Thank you. Right, anyone else?
I'd like to know what are the aims for the next couple months of this committee? And then maybe that could help align to whether or not ad hoc.
The aim of this committee, as I understand it, is that we have one area that we missed the deadline on for the 31st, that we need to make sure that we have firmed up and that we have something to present. And then we have 2 additional areas with deadlines for July of 2026. So we want to begin that work sooner than later. One of the things that Laura said was that they need a lot of lead time. So by divvying this kind of up and providing an opportunity for us to discuss and add to in the coming meetings will allow us to, one, hopefully meet that target well in advance of that time, and then continue the work of the committee that is listed in our in the legislation. So that kind of moves us into, so we're going to have section 13A, which is what we've been talking about here in the alternative routes. Then we're also going to have 2 other areas, section 13B and section 12A. And I'm going to ask Chloe if she can bring up that legislation so we can review it and understand what those 2 areas are and what the deadline and expectations are. And then having heard those 3 areas, thinking about what ad hoc committee you'd like to be on to start moving that work forward so that in our next several meetings, we can actually start looking at some potential language around that. So
I just need clarification. So if an ad hoc committee, the ad hoc committees will be formed based on the bylaws. But the goal of that ad hoc committee will come back and present to the larger group.
Correct.
Correct. Okay.
Because that'll allow the whole group to then hear the ideas that they have synthesized based on what we have stated here in this meeting. Work on the recommendations that CPRL has provided within their document as well, with the legal department from the State Department of Education. And then they can present that, and we would then have those conversations around, does something need to be amended within that? Is there language that needs to be changed? Is there more flexible language that needs to be added into that? So we will have several groups working on different areas to move that work forward and then present, and then we would have this group have those conversations around it. Does that make sense? Okay. So we have up there on the screen right now, section, is that 13?
Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
Excuse me. That's okay.
Jen?
I'm sorry to interrupt. So I'm just checking the agenda. Have we moved totally off the alternate route to certification discussion, 6A?
Yes. There was 5A because we.
Oh, excuse me, 5A. Okay, because I wanted to ask some questions of the group.
I don't think we did any action items yet, but are we on action item D? We're on 5B.
Yeah, where are we on the agenda, I think is my question.
All right, development recommendations related to 24 regulation material overview, which was the regulation map that you guys have received as part of the email. We're currently in alternative routes to certification, items requiring action.
Should we spend more time on the above? Because I'm not sure.
It is currently 2:51. And we need to be able to get through the other items and move into those committees or ad hoc groups to do the rest of that work.
I think it's important to understand.
Yeah, go ahead. Apologies.
Understand the other attachments and the recommendations.
I'm going to hold on that part of it because that was added in by Chloe to have those documents to view. But we don't have anybody here from the regulations board, if I understand, to present on that, correct?
Which section are you?
The regulation materials overview, which was like that flow chart that you had attached.
Oh, yeah. It says develop recommendations related to the regulation material. Is there work to do there?
We will be doing that work in just a moment. So that was added on there. So
I can clarify on that section. So this section 13A, number 3 of the Public Act is the section that you all voted upon to say it is in, like, we are in process or progress, which was the word. I think you said process first, and then we changed it to progress, correct?
Yes.
Reverse process? Okay. You all are working on developing these recommendations in number 3. So that was what this section is relating to. And then I included those 3 flow charts. I reached out to the Regulation Review Committee. That is just the process that regulations must follow. So I didn't print them because they're large and it would be a lot of paper to use. I can absolutely do that if that would be helpful. But those flow charts, the ones that I shared, are the process. So that was just to be helpful, and like, this is the process that they have to go through for regulations.
all right, so in terms of what we have here for alternative route to certification,
When you say, just a point of clarification, alternative route to certification, are you talking about like the in general, like all routes programs, or are you talking about the alternative route to content knowledge?
so the alternative route to certification is based on the language that we have that we're required to do. So I think that is 13A.
It's 13. 13A3.
A3. So develop recommendations as whether alternative approaches should be offered to allow candidates to demonstrate such minimum content knowledge no later than the very first.
So I just want to be clear, Jennifer, because I don't know if you, as a person who's opened an alternative to program in the state, it's confusing to see a discussion on alternative routes to certification because those are programs, but we are only focusing on content knowledge and alternatives to that.
Developing recommendations as whether alternative approaches should be offered to allow candidates to demonstrate such
the agenda.
Right. So that was the document where you guys were putting your information in, and this ad hoc group will be able to use and pull the themes out of there with the legal department to present possibly some languages to us. The reason why it says item requiring action is because we have to officially motion that we believe that praxis 6, or I don't know what I can say, praxis 6. Praxis 2 is our first route, and that we are looking into, that we want to develop alternative routes in addition to praxis 2. So we need a motion for that, and then a second, because that be our official, so that we can then move into
ad hoc committee 1.
Correct. Correct.
Ad hoc committee 1.
Correct.
Create the recommendations for praxis 2 plus alternatives.
Based on the information provided in that document.
Got it.
Correct. So do we have a motion currently? Is it a question or a motion? Okay. Sorry. Cynthia, go ahead.
No, you wanted
A motion.
motion to forward. Allowing.
Are we
Developing.
Well, we need to say whether or not we believe praxis 2 should stay and have an alternative route to go with it.
So moved.
So, but then those alternative routes will then be the work of the ad hoc committee, right? But we need to have an official motion and then second and a vote on that. So.
Motion for praxis to stay and alternative approaches.
Correct. Okay, do we have a second?
Seconded.
All right. Any discussion?
I have a question.
This is Catherine. I have my hand up.
Yes, of course. I'm sorry, Catherine, go ahead.
Okay, so I've had it up before the motion, so I just want some clarification. And so we're moving into an ad hoc, but I just want to bring up, it's not, the praxis already has an ETS bridge, which is already an alternative pathway for elementary ed. And I think what Anne wrote in her in the document because we already have that. We maybe we're waiting, and I know we had talked with folks earlier that ETS is going to be unrolling. So I think it's really, we have to be careful about the language because we already do have a alternative route, this ETS, the Praxis Bridge. So I just want to kind of put that out there. It's not an either or. We already kind of have
Right.
something.
Yeah, and I
that's in
appreciate that, and
process.
I think that'll be the work of the ad hoc group, and though it is a pilot, we don't have an official alternative program. It is a pilot currently.
It may
so,
be,
but that,
it might be a
that would be
pilot,
the-
however, but those people who are using the ETS Praxis Bridge will be certified. So while it might be a pilot, they still are going to get certification based on it. So I do think that we are in a space right now where we do have an alternative route. And I just think the language needs to kind of just want to put that out there, and I want to make sure that that's in the record.
I appreciate that. Did I see another raised hand? Jenny, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I had a question before we vote on whether or not we want Praxis 2 to stay or not stay. With the widening of the certification bands, how does Praxis 2 now affect those content areas? Like if I went to an educator preparation program to be a high school science teacher, but now with the certification band being 412, what does Praxis look like now for content area? And how are people getting prepared to take these Praxis tests?
It's a good question, but I think that would probably be under content area and determine like what we expect the minimum content area would be with different certifications. I think for this motion right now, what we're saying is keeping Praxis 2 and looking at alternatives to the Praxis 2 if you're not able to pass within a certain variation, looking at what the state is already doing, looking at the different ideas that were presented in that document by this group. So I think that would be for another one. And once we talk about the next 2 deadlines, I think that that's going to be in there for you.
Okay, because what I just didn't want is for more Praxis to be added to.
Can I answer that? I can answer that question if you.
To make sure that that content is covered within the Praxis testing.
And I'm just gonna ask for folks to remember to raise their hand and present their questions to the chair, and then we can ask whoever is in the room and direct them in those cases. Kristen, go ahead.
I'd like to speak in favor of the motion that I seconded. I think it's important that we explicitly take a vote on this because number 3 in our charge is to determine whether alternative approaches should be offered to allow candidates to demonstrate such minimum content knowledge. And I think the motion that Cynthia made shows, no worries, shows that we would indeed be supporting keeping Praxis 2 as the base way that the majority of candidates are going to show their proficiency in their minimum content knowledge, and would affirm that the state is already looking into these approaches, but it's our job as a committee to also make that recommendation that we're making this vote. We know the work is already being done. We know the Praxis Bridge is there, but that the state should be continuing this and that we will be looking at those alternative methods. So a vote, I will be voting in favor because I believe that for most students, if Praxis 2 is sufficient, great, but then alternative measures should still be allowed in order to expand our workforce.
Is there anyone else with a question or wish to speak in favor of or against the motion? Dr. Ritchie, go ahead.
So we are forming a subcommittee with the charge.
So first, the motion would have to pass that we are accepting keeping Praxis or the other testing, like Foundations of Reading, if still, all of the acronym tests, keeping those tests and adding in alternative methods, and then that other committee stuff would be after this.
I think it's just the language here, the way it's titled. So A is technically making a decision about Praxis, the alternatives.
However, you make a good point about the grade level bands. And we know we have a bridge for elementary. If the vote passes and praxis stays in their alternatives, will the charge of the committee be to expand to different grade levels? Like how big is the breadth of what we are voting in on? And I think the state leader has a hand up.
I just want to make one comment with the wording of the motion, and I think you alluded to it. It's not only praxis 2. So you want to be clear with the wording that it's the subject area assessment, because depending on the discipline, it might be Actville, it might be the Pearson early childhood assessment. So you don't want to constrain the language just to praxis 2. So
then, go ahead.
I'd like to amend that motion and say that we continue to use current subject area assessments articulated by the State Department of Education and add alternatives to be developed within the ad hoc committee.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was perfect.
Was well. Make sure we got it.
Apologize for the agenda. I'm not a subject matter expert, so yeah.
Let's go ahead and get the language first, and then we'll make sure that we understand the language before we have any additional comments. We're all on the same page.
I just had one more.
I'll have Chloe read it back to us just to make sure.
Wish I knew shorthand.
It's called the eye. Well done. Productive use of AI. It's pretty cool. All right, so Chloe, could you read that back to us?
The motion is motion to continue to use subject area assessments articulated by CSDE and add alternatives to be developed within the ad hoc committee. That makes sense.
Yeah. Do we need a vote to approve the amendment then? Yes, so we need a vote to approve the amendment. All those in favor of approving the amendment?
Two hands.
6, 7.
2 hands, 8.
Right now, we're just voting. Okay. So voting. Yeah. Okay. So if you could click the raise hand button on your screen, it would make it a little bit easier to ensure that we have the correct number for everyone. In terms of voting in favor of. All right. So we have in favor of right now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay. Any opposed? Those friends who had their hands raised for being in favor, please unselect. We have 1 opposed. Okay.
Raise your hand up, Cynthia.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Are you opposed?
No, I was.
Okay, sorry. Okay. So we have 1 opposed, and then do we have any abstention? Right, the motion carries then. So the current motion is as stated by Chloe. Do we have any further discussion or questions on that motion before we vote to move to vote to officially adapt the motion? All right, go ahead, Jen.
So my understanding is that the motion is to say like we keep what we have, but would the ad hoc committee then talk about the passing rates and whether or not we'll include the standard error of measurement later?
We can discuss what you want the committee to do.
Okay.
Parameters around that, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Right. Barring any further discussion, all those in favor, say aye or raise your hand online.
4.
4. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Right, those against? And those who are not in favor, right? And then any abstentions? Just to clarify, Catherine, are you an abstention or an against? Abstention, okay, thank you. All right, so moving forward with that. We will come back to what the parameters and the committees are. I'm going to get to a couple of these items needing to fire in, and then we'll go back into what the different committees are. It's going to be several different ones. So we want to make sure that we have all the items requiring action done as part of that. Okay. So code for professional conduct came up. It was on the last page of the CPRL account, CPRL report that they had given us. And there is a question about whether or not we are in charge of that or Cactopus is in charge of that. Did you pull up that CPRL report, the last page? You're on Cactopus, okay, perfect. So my understanding is that A through D inclusive is being repealed. And the only that's staying is E, which is listed on the back here. So there is whether or not we need to have a discussion around whether it is Cactopus is required to do the code of professional conduct, or if that is part of our responsibilities. And then we would also have to put an ad hoc committee together to review the ones that are being sunsetted and what our recommendations might be if we want to.
Which CPRL document?
It is summary of education preparation and certification regulations, probably the most updated one that has a little highlighting on it. I have the old one here. And I think it was the last page, the first bullet point. It was referencing section 10-145D, 400A and E. Governs the review and revision of the code of professional responsibility for teachers. It allocates the authority to review the code of professional responsibilities to the Connecticut Advisory Council for Teacher Professional Standards, Cactopus. With this regulation having been identified for repeal, this board should assess whether the authority should lie with them or with us. We should probably we might have committee for that as well. So the question then becomes, all of the standards for the code of professional responsibility, A through D, are going to be repealed. So that's everything that is listed in there about what your professional code of conduct is. The question is for this group as to whether it's part of our purview as opposed to Cactopus. And then we need to vote on that. And if we decide that's part of our purview at certification board, then we need to establish an additional ad hoc group to work on those that group like that as well.
Okay. Have you spoken to the chair of Cactopus to see if they believe it's in their purview?
We have a representative here who's also on Cactopus. My understanding is that the group, as of late, which was also discussed, I think last year at the committee, has primarily just been given updates by the State Department of Education of new things that are happening. But they don't have governance in terms of like a voting semi-autonomous body, which we do. So they could make recommendations, but they wouldn't have to like vote on specific things to put forward kind of thing. And they're more of a recommendation board, is my understanding. But they don't have the same semi-autonomous powers, authorities that we do in presenting our regulations and potential legislation to the rights board, legislator, and the State Department of Education, the Board of Education. So that was kind of why that question came up. Does it fall? Do we believe that it falls within our purview? And if we do, then we would have to vote on that to present that to the Board of Ed. And then start kind of looking into what it is that we want in that. Dr. Ritchie?
I would like to make a motion to table this decision so that we can have time to review the documents, see what went into the legislation, understand the work we have ahead, and have time to make a decision. And I also make a request. We're going to vote on things. If they could please be attached in the email attachment we get so that we can have prior time to read and digest and ask questions, or we are asked to make them.
The motion. So it wouldn't be immediately a motion. So we present what we know needs actions to happen, and then it's within the boards to make a motion within that. So we wouldn't be able to present a motion in advance because then it would be myself making the motion. We can present what we believe these actions need to be taken on, and then the board themselves, this board would then make a motion to move forward in whatever way they decide.
Right, but that's where they fit on items for discussion. We can have discussion first, and then at the following meeting or later in that same meeting, we can take action on the discussion, but without discussion and prior information, it's really hard to know if we're making the right decision or wrong decision. So I ask for more time regarding this.
I would second that tabling and decision.
I also agree with Catherine.
Like go into this document.
Is there any further discussion?
Their timeline for everyone else needs to.
There isn't necessarily a timeline. It was just a suggestion that was listed on there that we should be considering. I'm not sure if it's 2020. I think it's 2026 that these are under there, but when we were going to be setting up ad hoc communities, we wanted to make sure that we had something available for each one. So the motion currently stands as tabling this for and adding it to discussion for the next meeting.
Would it be beneficial to have someone from the department who oversees that area be just present? Should you have questions or things come up? Because we have someone who's been consistent in the department in managing. She'll be able to provide, but at least.
So I think what we need to do right now is I think we need to vote, either have discussion on this and then vote on it. If it fails or if it passes, then we can add to it what we would like to see for the next meeting.
Can Cynthia just clarify, because I heard you say make it for the future, but then I heard you say make it for next time. And to me, I wouldn't second next time. There's too much to be done in the next, I'd say 3 to 4 meetings. So I would, Cynthia, can you just clarify your motion?
Sure. So the motion was to pause this work until we can learn more. I love the idea of Cynthia recommendation of bringing someone from the department in to educate us on what this means. So I would make a motion that we table any decision on B today in that until we learn more. And I'm not sure, I agree, I'm not sure if this is priority for this year, if this is the 2 or 3 year meeting, or if this is something that we can talk about in the future. So I leave that to the committee's discussion.
Is there any further discussion? Go ahead, Patrice.
Just a question, and I don't know if someone here can answer it, but as I read this language, the Code of Professional Responsibility for Teachers will continue to exist even after July 1 of 2026. It's only the question of the review and revision that has been repealed.
No, I believe that they are being sunsetted. So A through D is actually being sunsetted and eliminated. So we would have to, if we decide that this is part of our responsibility, we would have to create that the previous ones and decide if we want to keep any of that and or add to what was previously there. So it is part of that kind of like timeline. Are there any other questions? Catherine,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Do you think you can navigate to that piece that you just alluded to, the A through D, them being sunsetted? Because based on the council, there was conversation about them remaining intact. So can you just kind of navigate to that language?
I'm sorry, maybe that was confusing. The council isn't being sunsetted. It's the professional conduct that is being sunsetted. And we're trying to identify whether or not this is not Cactus Bus's responsibility, but actually our responsibility. Because then we would have to establish what the new code of conduct, or the conduct itself is being sunsetted.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, no problem. Jenny, go ahead.
Would it make sense for the chairs of this board to reach out to the chair of Cactopus to discuss?
I'd like to make an amendment to the motion, and I would like to motion that we do not proceed with the decision on the code of professional conduct at this time and resume this conversation in our April.
There a second to the amendment? We'll put the amendment. Is there any discussion on the amendment?
Just to clarify.
Sure, go ahead.
So that means that at our March meeting, you can have the State Department of Education staff speak about it. You would speak to the chair of.
I would actually say that at the April meeting is when they would talk.
Yes, I would too.
Yeah.
Just let me straight.
That way it's kind of the theme of the meeting. Yeah. Right. Is there any other discussion or question? All right, so we're just voting on the amendment to the original motion. So those in favor of Rebecca's amendment to the original motion, please raise your hand and or say aye. Just raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 13, 14 in favor. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. And any abstentions? So now, is there any discussion about the amendment as it stands? Rebecca, could you repeat your motion?
I make a motion to not make a decision on the code of professional conduct, not discuss until our April meeting.
Is there any discussion on that? All right, seeing none, we'll put it to a vote. Those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. All right, those not in favor? Those abstaining? So then we'll put on the April agenda to invite folks from the department, from the State Department of Education, as well as possibly reach out to see if we can share or co-chair consequences to attend that meeting.
Can send you there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. All right. Next is review upcoming deadlines. So Chloe, if you can pull that up in section 13B as well as section 12A in the statute.
Okay. Thank you.
So 12A says no later than July 1st, 2025. This summer, the Connecticut Education Preparation Certification Board established pursuant to section 10 of the Act shall develop standards and proposals for regulation and regulations regarding 1, the evaluation criteria that will be used to assess proposals for local or regional boards of education, regional education service centers, and educator preparation programs for alternative pathways for educators to progress, from an initial educator certification to a professional educator certification, or to be issued a cross adjustment that will enable such educator to teach in content areas or grade beyond their initial certification area, as well as 2, the manner in which degrees from educator preparation programs approved by the State Department, State Board of Education will align with the revised endorsement codes under section 10(145)D of the general statutes as amended by this act. 3, the adequacy and relevance of existing certification endorsement areas, or the implementation of the standard for educator preparation programs developed by the council for the accreditation of educator preparation. Excuse me. 5, the necessity of the temporary 90-day certification issued under section 145B of the general statutes as amended by the Act, and C, the design and development of a statewide data dashboard, and we will longitudinal monitoring of education workforce data. So that's our next. We have two, but they have the same deadline. So process that for a moment. And then go down to the next one, which is 13B, I think it is. The Connecticut Educator Preparation and Certification Board established pursuant on Section 10 of this Act shall, one, undertake a comprehensive review of the certification endorsement areas for the purpose of A, developing standards regarding the adequacy and relevance of such endorsement areas, and B, considering whether the grade or endorsement area should be expanded, explore the alternative pathways. All part of B. Consider whether the, so not the A part, but the B part. So consider whether the grade range for the endorsement area should be expanded to develop alternative pathways for educators to receive cross endorsement. And 3, consider whether to transfer authority over candidate admission criteria for alternative routes to certification programs to the program providers no later than July 1st, 2025. So I am thinking that just like Section 13 AC, we should consider having 2 ad hoc committees to handle reviewing and making recommendations to this board for 12A and for 13. Is there any discussion on that? I have a motion. Is there any questions about that?
Will there be updates from the State Department perhaps on the work that they are doing? I would think this is part of their regular flow of operations.
I think the ad hoc committee would be tasked with having those conversations with the departments and then compiling that information to present here to. So we have Section 12A. Go ahead, Rebecca, please.
Reading this, maybe, yeah, it feels like B is in they're connected. And so you, like, can you do B without having clarity on where A is going? Because once, like, if the ad hoc group decides A is gonna go in this direction and the ad hoc B group goes in this direction, they actually don't connect. So I wouldn't start an ad hoc B until we have clarity on A.
So I think B, it's lowercase b, not uppercase.
No, like going lowercase a, you go scroll up, right? So you're saying A, are you saying 2 ad hoc groups for uppercase A, B?
No, so there's Section 12.
Right. So Section 12A, we've got to figure that out first to be able to then go into the next section.
Okay, so would you, I guess the question would then be, should we just start off with A and develop an ad hoc group that would tackle A, and then their continued work from there would then move into 13B?
That's how it seems to me, but I'm open to somebody, if somebody's seeing it differently, like you could do both at the same time, I would love to hear their ideas. But to me, yes, I would say let's start with A and then wait to do B.
That would.
That's going to inform your ad hoc B.
Any other discussion from the group? So then, barring any discussion, we currently have then is an ad hoc group for Section 13A, C, that needs to be wrapped up, and then Section 12A, right? So at this time, kind of think about where you would like to be. We'd like to have representation from each of the areas on each of the groups, but I don't think that the ad hoc group should be more than 4 people. To kind of move that work forward, you know, to meet with the admin as well as the legal department. So 13A really falls 13 AC really falls within the work you've already done in terms of adding your ideas on what we should look at for alternative routes in addition to Praxis 2. Who would like to be a part of that ad hoc?
It's the second one.
And I think Dr. Ritchie would be a good recommendation. She already has some foundational language there for that part, and that was 13AC, which was a possible alternative approaches to the possible alternative approaches that we talked about earlier.
We have some hands raised down.
So let's go with, we didn't see who went first, so I'm just gonna go in order of what I see. So Jen, go ahead.
If they want to be on the committee, they may be.
I was raising my
Okay.
hand, yeah, to say I would like to be on that committee.
Sure.
Sarah, your hand is down now. And so Sarah, you'd like to be on that 13AC?
Yes.
Okay, and then we also have Anne.
I was also raising for the committee. I think 13A is the,
13AC, yeah, it's the one that we're talking about right now. So just making sure
Yeah.
that I've got the correct names here. Catherine Rowe.
Yep.
Great, do we have anyone in person to be on that list? Anyone else for me to kind of review over and make sure we have a little bit of each, so administration, some teachers, some communities, want to have a little bit of each. All right, section 13A, which we just reviewed, it's on the screen right now. We need an ad hoc group for that and to begin that work to then present to the board and have discussion around.
You need 12 days for that.
You
really
need 12A. Oh, I'm sorry, 12A, 13A. Thank you for saying that clarifies there, Dr. Ritchie. Section 12A, which is no later than July 21st, we already read it. So give a look over and those who would like to be considered for that ad hoc committee, please raise your hand now. Okay. Lisa. Great. Do we have any members online who would also like to be involved in that ad hoc group? You only
I'm
have
just
two.
gonna say, now I'm confused about the two ad hoc groups because I thought you were talking about 12 earlier.
Oh, I can take you off of 12 and move you, take you off
No,
of 13 and move you to
12 was
12.
what we voted on first. 12 was what I wanted, but I thought I was hearing 12 and 13 mixed up, so.
So 13A is the one that is Praxis 2 and an alternative route. So is that the one that you want?
Yes, that was the one I wanted to be on.
So you raise your hand for the right one.
Okay.
And then this one is for develop standards and proposals for regulation and legislation regarding the evaluation criteria that will be used to assess proposals from local and regional boards of education, regional education service centers, and education, excuse me, preparation programs for alternative pathways for educators to programs, to progress, sorry. So we have
I think
two
I want to
people
switch to this one, please. Because
I'm
of
sorry,
my
who was
role
that,
here.
Jen?
Yeah, because of my role here, I think I want to switch to this one. Because it's dealing specifically with alternative pathways. So if someone else wants to jump on another committee.
Sure, that's section 12A then.
Yeah, thank you.
So right now then we have Sarah for 13AC, which is Praxis and alternative routes. Anne, Catherine, and Kristen. So we have an administrator, VPs, classroom teacher. And then for 12A, just the one that's on the screen right now, we have Rebecca, Elsa Batista, and Jen D, correct? Is there anyone else who would like to be part? Because I'd like it to be about 4-ish. So,
Person be on more than one subcommittee?
yeah, you could be on one subcommittee. It really depends on what your,
Done so good together.
I mean, it really just depends on what your availability and flexibility is. I don't want to overload anybody in particular, so do we have anyone else then?
I will join this.
It's the 12A one? Yeah. All right, so currently that's who we have for those. Right, so we tackle, just to kind of go back over this. We looked at the suggestions, did the update on the meeting with the representative, and Lieber, we discussed, or Chloe discussed hiring update, and that we're much closer to having our final candidates now. And then the packet for that was presented will be emailed out to everyone. Council for the Accreditation Education, they did their presentation, and there was good discussion around that. Items for discussion was what was in the working document, which led us into having this ad hoc committee that will begin that process of drafting legislation and reviewing the legislative the literature and language that Dr. Ritchie already has there through CPRL. Develop recommendations, which will be part of that ad hoc group. At the next meeting, we will have somebody from the regulations department. Is that correct? So we decided to kind of go over what the regulations process is.
I just shared them.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Is there an expectation from the board to have somebody here explain the regulations process, the regulations board? And then the items that we got through, we have our ad hoc committee for the alternative routes in addition to certification. I know it's confusing, but understanding. We have tabled the Code of Professional Conduct until the April meeting, at which time we'll have somebody represented from the State Department of Education and likely a chair from Cactibus there as well to discuss. Review upcoming deadlines, and we have our ad hoc committee formations. Okay. Is there any discussion around what the expectation is from these ad hoc committees? Because there was some early conversations that we have to hold off until we had them established. So why don't we have conversations about what the expectation is from the board of what they will kind of bring forward and when, like the timeline next Wednesday. So for Sarah and Catherine and Kristen for that section 13A, which we had some discussion about already in terms of the ideas. What is the expectation of the board? What would they like to see them bring forward in what timeline?
May I speak?
Jen, go ahead.
So, Lauren Tafredi also mentioned this, just to remember to think about all of the assessments, not just the practices too, the ACTFL as well. And I think Lauren mentioned another one that it's just escaping my memory right now. Just a reminder to look at those as well.
Foundations of Reading.
Thank you.
And then is there any other?
I would hope for our next board meeting in March that there is from both ad hoc committees an update as to progress made within whatever conversation they've had between now and then. And any recommendations that they would like to bring forth to us as a full to discuss.
Makes sense. Go ahead, Catherine.
Thank you. I don't know if this is appropriately placed, but I just wanted to circle back to meeting with Representative Leeper. I didn't know that a representative of the board would be meeting, and I'm not sure what that agenda was. So maybe we could share that agenda, or perhaps we can invite our representatives from the education committees to the board so that they understand what our charges are, so we can collaborate with our representatives. It's just an idea.
The representative had reached out to us to discuss where we were and to provide an update, which I think our bylaws that the chair is supposed to be the voice of the board in things like this, and then we kind of provide you guys with the information of what was discussed at the meeting. But it was not us who initiated the meeting, it was Representative Lieber who initiated the meeting.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. There was no, I'm just looking for more transparency. It has nothing to do with our leaders, and I totally trust you. So it's not about, it's just about transparency. And I think it could be helpful, especially, and not, I meet with the legislators. So I would just love to know what the agenda is so that I can circle back when I meet with them as a representative of AACTE. That's really why I bring that up. And I do want to I also want to underscore what Cynthia also said earlier. It would be really helpful if we had all the historical documents and the research that we need so that we can do the work in preparation to prepare for the agenda. That would be helpful.
I think Laura Stefan presented what was before the things that they were considering, the education committee was considering. But it was very generic because they hadn't really put together full language at that time.
Was there information I didn't share? Because everything is posted, and all the legislative materials are posted publicly.
I think it was at our last meeting, or kind of had like a list of the things that the education committee was considering in a very rough and general format, because I don't think they had like all the details on it, but it was kind of like a more thematic, I think, or topics, if I'm remembering correctly. But I think Laura Stefan presented that to us. And then once there is more documentation or legislation out there that is related specifically to, if it's related to certification and preparation, we would bring that to the board to discuss and have that conversation around public participation and testimony as well. From the board. In terms of 13A C, is there any additional discussion on what the board would like to see from that ad hoc committee by the next meeting? So Rebecca had already stated updated progress made and recommendations. And I think Jen had talked about the different certifications within that, right? So is there anything else that we are looking to have outside of what the legislation already said? And it will be up to the committee to decide when they want to meet. I know that when we did the bylaws, we did it virtually. So how often or when you want to meet would be up to that. And I think Chloe would probably send out an email to them directly asking what works for you so she can set up that meeting time and then provide you with whatever resources you feel you'll need for the work of that. For section 12A, which is Rebecca, Elsa, Jen, and Jenny. Jenny, right? Yes. Just want to make sure. Is there anything that specific that we expect from that committee?
I would like to ask some questions that I had wanted to ask earlier. I think this is a perfect time for it.
Is it specific for this committee, for the ad hoc committee?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So some of the things that going into the work of the ad hoc committee around alternative pathways, like I wanted to just put it out to this group or anybody in the public who's watching, like what are some needs moving forward that we should consider? I'd love to know like what are traditional programs experiencing when people decide not to go with that program, and maybe what they've heard about what people are looking for alternatively. Are there any programs that have been proposed, but they didn't work out for some reason or another? And we could examine maybe what stopped that program from moving forward and how we can adjust and realize those types of programs that maybe have been getting stuck somewhere along the way. is there possibly a way to fast track alternative programs to make the process of getting launched a little faster? And I know a lot of the programs, several of the alternative pathways are for people who already have an initial. But there's something to be said about, is there some way to, for example, special education, that's something I'd love to look into. Is there a way we could get an initial into an alternative pathway? Which I think TRP has at this point, but what else could we do to offer more opportunities? Because that's such a shortage area. So I just wanted to throw those questions and my curiosities out to the team and anyone in the public who may be watching, as I said, because that will give us ideas outside of just the four of us. So if you come up with something, please let us know. Or if you have an idea now, I'd love to hear it going into that work.
Does anyone want to respond to that?
It might be helpful to have the legislation back up, because I think that section of the legislation was not about alternate route certification for initial certification. It was looking at the language of going from initial to professional. So some of the work that happened of that last year was sort of looking at alternatives to the master's degree being required. So I think that ad hoc committee, I mean, if you're doing ad hocs based on subsections of the legislation, it seems that is about something different than what Jen was just referencing. That's about moving from initial to professional. But I did want to make a comment for the ad hoc committee that's going to be looking at the subject area assessment piece, only because it came up in that shared document many times referencing a portfolio. And I'm not sure, because I may have stepped out to the restroom. I don't know who the representation is on that. One thing just to keep in mind is that Connecticut for about 7 years went through a pilot process implementation of EdTPA, which was a portfolio assessment, and last legislative session that was eliminated and no longer can be utilized. And I only say that because the work that went into the creation of EdTPA to have a valid and reliable performance assessment, I would just caution you to sort of like look at what that journey was before you decide, oh, another portfolio assessment is the answer to that, because EdTPA to some extent was that and was content specific, and EPAPs spent years upon years training their faculty, sort of aligning their rubric, sort of doing all this work so that their candidates were successful. And it's no longer required. So before you're like, oh, hey, come up with a new portfolio assessment, correct, you may want to just be mindful of the last portfolio assessment's journey.
Yeah, and I think, the amount of testimony that was provided on getting rid of EdTPA is something to consider, because we have many brand new students, newly graduated students who came forth to really testify against the portfolio.
So when we say portfolio, I just would think about that in that context.
Yeah.
Lauren, so somebody help me out, because it's very possible I'm misreading or misinterpreting. So what I'm reading here is that we have to look at the evaluation criteria to assess proposals from various stakeholders for alternative pathways for educators to go from initial to professional. And correct. But would that, am I mistaken to think, like, for example, like the ARC program, ARC-TEL, that could take you to a cross endorsement, for example, because that's also mentioned here about a cross endorsement. So is that, am I misinterpreting this? Because I would love to know to make sure, because that's how I'm reading it. What are, alternative pathways and ways to propose to do that?
So Jen, what we can also do as part of the ad hoc committee, we can request that legal sit in on those meetings to assist with really deciphering what it is that the statute is stating, to make sure that everybody on that ad hoc committee truly understands what the legalese is here. So we can request that that happens as part of the ad hoc committee. And maybe that's the first meeting is really kind of doing a deep dive into what the expectation is based on the legislation. And then moving forward from there. Which is a recommendation that I think for both committees, quite honestly, would be to have the legal department there to provide that support and those questions on understanding the statute as it's written.
Thank you.
Is there any other additional statements or concerns or questions around that? Okay. So the expectation then, it sounds like, is by the next meeting, our March meeting, we'll have an update from both, possibly some language. Chloe will be sending out an email to both groups to find a time that works both for all, to begin scheduling meetings to do that work. As part of that work, we will include the legal department to be there as well. So before the work, I think section 13AC, you guys are in good hands because Dr. Ritchie already has some language that can be worked from and vetted and discussed as part of those meetings to move forward. So I think we're in a good place. Something that did come up at the last meeting was putting things on the record. I'm going to ask Kristen if you can speak about our bylaws for that and the discussion that was made before.
Sure. At the end of the last meeting, several people had asked, may I add this comment to the record? May I add, and when the minutes were made for last meeting, one of the things I pointed out was that our bylaws actually don't allow for us as board members to put our individual comments in as part of the record. We had actually had that in the bylaws to start. And then through a motion and discussion, there was an amendment made to remove that language. The reason it was removed was that people had said the meetings are already public record, that your constituents should already be able to see the comments that you made and you can report your comments to them. And that by putting them as part of the record, it could look like the board's position is X when it's really an individual member of the board's position is X. So when you were looking at the minutes from the January meeting, that's why the comments people had asked to be put on the record were not included verbatim in the minutes. So thanks for bringing that up. That was something we had discussed when we originally approved the bylaws in December.
And the reason why I asked her to speak to it now, because the last meeting, I had made the mistake that in future meetings that we would have a section on our agenda that allowed for additional statements by the board, and that couldn't be. So I wanted to make sure that everybody understood why it couldn't be. So at this time, we are open to any public participation. If anyone is online from the public or has written their name down on the sign-up sheet, this would be your time to forward to provide any commentary. We don't have anyone signed up, and it doesn't look that we have anyone online looking to participate. So with that, I will take a motion.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. One is zero. Oh, that's 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Catherine did everything. Okay, 14. So motion passes. I look forward to hearing what the ad hoc committees will bring forward and that we can start the deep work of getting things into writing and meeting or back to resolutions or legislation. All right, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great month.
Yeah.